On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
When young souls are brutally murdered for the only fact, the only grave sin of being Jews, Israelis living in Israel, it's not a tragedy. It's called murder. It's called terrorism. It's called brutality. That's not a tragedy. That's murder. And in situations like that, you're not supposed to be quiet.
That's the voice of Rabbi Shmuley Weiss in Montreal Monday afternoon, outside the rhotic gates of McGill University, where the Chabad leader joined about 70 or 80 students gathered for a memorial vigil in honor of the 3 members of the Bibas family, murdered by Hamas over a year ago in Gaza, their bodies handed back just a few days ago in a horrific and traumatic ceremony. Jewish people around the world will likely remember where they were when this happened. The fate of this particular family has touched us deeply. They became the international symbol of the 250 hostages captured 16 months ago. As one Jewish Canadian leader put it, you are beyond words, looking for public statements of support and sympathetic texts from your non-Jewish friends and leaders expressing their outrage for this inhumanity. And those two emotions, grief and anger, have been on display across Canada in the last few days, as Jews and allies from coast to coast have mourned deeply the deaths of the Bibas family and the murder of their 84-year-old neighbor from Kibbutz Nir Oz, Oded Lifshitz, whose body was also returned last weekend. Even though very few of us had direct personal ties, they felt like our own.
We can remain strong by doing mitzvot in their honor. Keep them in your hearts and your minds with every good deed that you do. This way, we keep their memories alive, and we keep their memory for a blessing.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Tuesday, February 25th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Since last week, there have been public ceremonies and memorial vigils, but also many personal, private moments that perhaps some of you did, like what I did on the day when Israel confirmed Hamas was going to hand over the bodies of the Bibas children and their mom. I hugged my CJN work colleague Phoebe Maltz-Bovey. We were both overcome with sadness. And then that evening when I got home from work, I went to my fridge door where my red and white hostage poster's been hanging ever since November 2023. There are photos of 10 hostages on it, and over the past 16 months, I'd crossed out most of them in black marker every time we learned they'd been murdered. When Yarden Bibas was freed on February 1st, I drew a heart with an exclamation point on his picture. Finally, some hope. Although, to be honest, it's always been hope beyond hope that his wife and the boys were somehow also alive. On Thursday night, I solemnly drew an X across 5-year-old Ariel's photo. And then I couldn't function for the rest of the night or the next day. Then we learned Saturday it was Shiri's remains who were going to be returned, and I reluctantly crossed off her image too. In Vancouver, an impromptu gathering began outside the Chabad Center on Oak Street on Thursday. Someone had placed a blown-up poster of older brother Ariel hugging his baby brother Kfir. People started bringing candles and bouquets of orange flowers. Ever since October 7th, Ruti Mizrahi has hung a string of blue and white lights on her Vancouver balcony. The daycare supervisor hasn't turned them off, in the hopes that her uncle Oded Lifshitz might return alive from captivity. The former journalist and his wife Yocheved, her aunt, were both taken by Hamas. Her aunt was eventually freed. He was badly wounded. His body was handed over this weekend. While Ruti Mizrahi did not attend the regular weekend Bring Them Home Now vigil in Vancouver on Sunday because she told organizers she needed more time to process everything, she did speak to our CJN's Jonathan Rothman about what it all means.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke before September, but please, tell us what you would want everyone to, from your eyes, from your words of Oded.
For me, he was a great uncle. When I was a child, I thought that he's the tallest person in the world. He used to pick me up and put me up on high places. Was amazing with kids, any kids. Like if you see him, I think he should be working with kids, always, his home, their home, always open to everybody. And other than this, he was just really cared about what's going on with other people. He couldn't stand if any injustice for everybody. He didn't care about, you Muslim, you Jewish, you Christian, right? Like he really fought for justice, and he was a role model for me. And he was a true Zionist, and one thing that I hope it's okay that I'm saying, so I read in the newspaper that after they will, get the remains of him, and they going to put him in a coffin covered with the flag of Israel. And that made me think when you're talking about Israel and Zionist, and this is him. He fought for Israel. He really cared. He loved. And at the same time, I'm just thinking, this is the country who, in a way, abandoned him and the others, didn't defend them when they needed, So it's causing me ask questions that I would never think in my life that I would even think of, Yeah, I think the world lost really very special and caring and amazing person, And I'm missing him already, right? But I know so many people are going to miss him, and
thank you for
thank
sharing
you.
the extra.
I one of the things that I thought, I had a lot of talk with him when he was in my head, right? And I thought to myself, wow, I wonder what would he say now? Because, he always helped the Palestinian people, not the Hamas, God forbid, right? But the regular, the simple people, right? And I was thinking to myself, what would he say now after what happened? Would he still continue to do, what he did? And I think the big answer is probably yes. Like he would still, will he still drive those cancer patients to hospitals? Yes, he will. Will he still feel that we need to separate and have two different states? I believe he will, right? But it's so painful, really painful to think that, no one life should end like this way, right? But, my aunt, Yorte, when she was in Gaza, Sinwar came to visit them and check. And she asked him, she said, aren't you ashamed? Like, who are you hurting? The people who helped you the most, help you people, not you, right? But help the poor citizens of yours that actually he doesn't care about, never cared about them, right? And that's, I hear it in my head over and over and over again.
There is something about that feeling, a house filled, a table complete, that settles the soul.
Still with Vancouver, Rabbi Dan Moskowitz of Temple Shalom prepared his Shabbat sermon based on the Torah portion, where Moses makes sure to flee Egypt, but bring with him the bones of our forefather Joseph, who wanted to be buried in his homeland of Israel. The synagogue members added 3 more memorial stones to their new October 7th sculpture unveiled last fall. The monument acknowledges those killed at the Nova Music Festival and elsewhere in Israel. There are over 1,600 small black stones. Each one bears the name and age of a victim. Now there are 4 more for the Bibas boys and Shiri and Oded Lifshitz. Rabbi Moskowitz was struck by the jarring contrast of his family's joy as he and his wife celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary last week with all their kids at home with them for the event, and the new reality for the thousands of Israeli families torn apart on October 7th.
I think every parent knows this truth instinctively. You're never really at peace until all your children are home. Because just as a family is not whole when even one child is missing, our people are not whole while our brothers and sisters remain in captivity. A few weeks ago in the Torah, we read of Moses making a choice in the midst of the chaos of the Exodus, not just to lead his people forward from slavery to freedom, but to look back and to ensure that Joseph was brought home with them. The Israelites were leaving in haste. They barely were able to grab their own essentials. They didn't even have time, as we know, to let their bread rise. And yet still, in the midst of all of that rushing and chaos, Moses had not just the presence of mind, but had the sense of shlichut, of sacred purpose, to go and find Joseph's bones, to not forget them. Because redemption would be incomplete if Joseph were left behind. Because no matter how long he had been gone, no matter how deep the exile, bringing him home was an obligation that could not be forgotten or forsaken. As we gathered in our home last night, surrounded by love, warm and safe, bellies full and rejoicing in the simple joy of normalcy that seems to be increasingly elusive and precious as our children become more and more independent, I thought of all of the families that have been shattered by this war, in Israel and in Gaza. Because every family built on love cherishes moments together. That's not a Jewish thing. That's a human thing. And I thought particularly of the Bibas family, the father Yarden, just days before redeemed from captivity, waiting with fading hope for his wife and children, learning with the rest of the world that like the bones of Joseph, it would be their bodies that would be returned. Their lives had been forever taken by the most inhumane. And then with horror that Hamas and their unfathomable cruelty had stolen even that solace too, withholding the body of his wife, the boy's mother, Shiri, from returning to her final rest with them, to lay once more by their side, as every parent does with their child at some point. There are no words that can explain such depravity. Our last images were of them enveloped in her sheltering arms. When were they separated? Did she even or ever hold or see them again? The allusions to all the worst images of the Shoah, they are like a knife in our heart. We are living in a time of deep anguish. It's not new to our people, but it is new to our generation, new to our generation of Jews. We find ourselves still waiting for redemption. It is incomplete. Since October 7th, we have been haunted by the kidnapping of so many of our people, some of whom were brutally murdered and whose bodies remain to this day in captivity in Gaza. Their return is not only a political demand, it is a sacred obligation. Their souls cry out to us just as Joseph's bones cried out to Moses, "Redeem me, bring me home." In Jewish tradition, kavod hamet, honoring the dead, is one of the greatest mitzvot, one of the greatest commandments. It's a mitzvah we know that cannot be repaid, a pure act of love and respect. We do not abandon our dead. We honor and revere them. We memorialize them with candles and stones. Even when it is painful, even when it seems impossible, we bring them home. While the world moves on, while leaders weigh political costs, while attention fades, while terrorists continue to terrorize in ever more incomprehensible ways, we cannot stop demanding the return. But like Moses, we will not forget them. Like Moses, we will carry their memory, and like Moses, we will not rest until we can bring them all home. Because our redemption, like the Exodus itself, remains incomplete until we do. Am Yisrael Chai.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
In Edmonton, 200 people came out Sunday afternoon behind the Talmud Torah school building. Many brought bouquets of orange balloons with them, which they released into the sky. One young boy showed up wearing a black Batman costume in tribute to Ariel, Bibas' favorite superhero character. The murdered preschooler had dressed up as Batman on his last Purim, just months before he was kidnapped. The local Iranian community donated a bouquet of flowers with a message that read, "There are no words, only broken hearts," which was a welcome response after the Jewish Federation CEO Stacey Levitt Wright's appeal last week to the non-Jewish community to reach out and send comfort to Jewish Canadians, many who say they're feeling like they're living in a separate universe from everyone else as we live through this terrible chapter in the Bibas and our own family story. As it's often suggested to grieving people, one way to find a path forward is to do good deeds for others, which is why Levitt Wright is leading a delegation from Edmonton to Israel this week, not only to help rebuild the north, which saw 60,000 residents forced to evacuate after October 7th when Hezbollah launched its missile attacks on the area, but she'll also carry with her handmade cards and letters of sympathy.
That I will be traveling to Israel this coming week to once again bear witness, to represent our community, and to give leadership to the Project Regeneration in the North, seeking to make Etzba HaGalil stronger than it was on October 6th.
In Winnipeg, community leader Avram Shirak blew a long ram's horn, a shofar, at the official memorial service held Sunday evening at the Adash Yeshurun Herzliya Synagogue. After Tehillim and prayers for Israel and for the hostages, a volunteer read out the names of all 40 Israeli children murdered. El Mal Rachamim was chanted, so were parts of the book of Echa, or Lamentations. Then Rabbi Yosef Ben-Arosh told the audience that, believe it or not, there is something positive we should take forward from the murders of the Bibas family.
In our hearts, the worst scenario was playing. And yet, this is the silver lining, in my opinion, if there is one. We never gave up hope. We prayed every single day that those two children and their mother would come home. We prayed for it every single day. We refused to believe that they were gone. For 503 days, we clung to the hope that they would be alive, smiling together as a family, reunited with their loved ones and with their people. And only on that fateful moment where there was a positive identification from Abu Kabir, only at that moment did we finally accept the fact that they were gone. And maybe this is the silver lining. Maybe it's through them we fulfill the words of Israel's national anthem, Od lo abda tikvatenu, that we are a people of hope. We never, ever give up. And that hope is a testament to the greatness of our people. And I want to say to all of you that this is the difference between our people and our enemies. We, the Jewish people, live in a world where we never give up hope that there's going to be a better and brighter day. We pray for the days where the words of our prophet Yeshayahu will be fulfilled. The wolf will lay down with the sheep and the leopard with the kid. Our people always pray for a brighter and happier world. That's who we are. That's who the Jewish people are. We are a people that glorifies life and not death. And the Bibas family taught us to never lose hope, to always cling to life until the last second. And today, he hoped to see all of the hostages return home alive and embraced by their families.
In Toronto, UJA Federation was first off the mark. Staff held a vigil on Thursday that was live streamed for anyone who needed to attend or wanted to but couldn't get there in person.
I was thinking about the names that are circulating. Oded means encouragement, always seeing the positive. Shiri means my song.
Vice President Susan Jackson stood in the darkened theater with purple stage lights illuminating the screen, showing a giant waving Israeli flag.
We are not just a nation. We are not just a civilization. We are not just a religion. Aside from being all of that, we are truly a global family. And when one behaves like a family, then one has simcha together and one mourns together. The entire Jewish world, in fact, is traumatized. And yes, we grieve as a family, but yet each one of us is an individual. And each one we grieve for and with is an individual. This is our Shiva. Allow yourself to think, to mourn, and to grieve.
אריאל, אני מבקשת סליחה. כפיר צ'וק, אני מבקשת סליחה. שירי, אני מבקשת סליחה.
And for the first time, we heard from Israelis living in Canada. These two Shinshinim volunteers will soon be returning to Israel to join the IDF in the spring.
I'm sorry that I didn't do enough. I'm sorry that even if I did, it wasn't enough. Slicha. I'm sorry that you were terrified and they were terrified you on the way there and even there. I'm sorry that we didn't scream louder. I'm sorry that we didn't shout more. I'm sorry that we didn't block all the main roads. I'm sorry we were more busy blocking the main roads than blocking your suffering. I'm sorry, Kfiri, that you spent more days in Hamas captivity than outside of it. I'm sorry, Arieli, that we didn't celebrate your birthday properly with cake and colorful balloons. I'm sorry, Shiri, that we couldn't help with the kids this time. I'm sorry that your beautiful red hair became a symbol of struggle. I'm sorry, Arieli, that we didn't fulfill your dream of becoming Batman and saving people stuck in a pit. I'm sorry that you were those people for 503 days.
Good morning, Martin. I'm fine, Baruch Hashem. How are you today?
In Thornhill, Ontario, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan of Chabad Flamingo urged his followers to study some Gemara, part of the Talmud, as a response to the Bibas family murders, and to seek inspiration from one of his congregants.
So there was a Brit this morning in Shul. That's always a beautiful thing. Not members of our community directly, but people that I know. And the grandfather, the father of the baby's mother, says to her daughter, tell the rabbi why you had this baby. And so the young lady says to me that, she has a family already, but after October 7th, she decided that as they are trying to kill us, we have to bring more Jewish people into the world. And that's why she chose to go ahead and have another baby. And I just want to tell you that I was extremely moved by this. I was moved by people translating sentiment into action. And when we are faced with the opposite of a simcha, with the opposite of a joyous reality, that the proper response is not to wring our hands and cry out in pain, although sometimes that's also nice and even appropriate. But the really appropriate and nicest thing of all is when we translate those feelings into action. And bringing a baby into the world is probably the single greatest thing any of us could ever do. And I hope that we will all be motivated to do something when we see tragedy and sadness coming out of our beloved homeland with our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael.
I'm Jack Berkowitz. I'm Jack Berkowitz, and I'm here, and it's Thursday.
While the overwhelming public-facing expressions were of sorrow, it wasn't that hard to find those who privately feel this has now pushed them even farther away from any possible reconciliation with Palestinian terrorists in the short term. It was a feeling that Mississauga radio host Jack Berkowitz dared to express on his show.
I'm here without the Bibas family and without Oded Lifshitz. For those who don't know, shame on you. Hamas announced a few days ago that today would be the day they handed them back, so I shouldn't be shocked. But I am beyond shocked because I held hope. I just kept on hoping. could not believe it. 32-year-old mother, a 9-month-old baby, a 4-year-old baby, the most gorgeous, gorgeous family you've ever seen. And they released the father last week. How can anyone be so evil? How could all of you, the entire world, turn a blind eye to these atrocities, to these monsters, to these horrible, horrible people? I don't want to say human beings because they are not human beings. I have always said, let's try to understand. I have always said there must be a reason. I have always said, let's get into their minds. Today, February 20th, I no longer say that. I say something else. I want their blood. I want their blood. I want the world to recognize that there is no salvation for these people. This is the day that I am turning. And if you all don't turn, then you are doomed to repeat the mistakes of history and to suffer the consequences.
We stand resilient.
Meanwhile, Montreal's main community vigil was held Thursday at Beth Israel Beth Aaron Synagogue, while Congregation Beth Thora, Chabad Saint Laurent, and Petach Tikva synagogues held their own gathering that same night. The message, quote, "Our Montreal community will forever honor their memory, hold on to their names, and stand together always. In heartbreak, we find strength. In sorrow, we find unity. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet."
Now is the time to grieve. After that, it will be time to make sure that this never, ever happens again. We deserve to fulfill the dream of a tikva, to be a free people in our land, without fearing that someone will break into our homes and take lives with such cruelty. We deserve a world where no child is murdered, no mother has to fear for her children's fate, and no grandchild ever has to ask where his grandfather. May their memory be a blessing.
Oded ben Biha, Ariel ben Yaltein de Shiri, Kfir ben Yaltein de Shiri.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Special thanks to Michael Sachs, Masha Kleiner, and Rabbi Dan Moskowitz in Vancouver, Stacey Levitt-Wright and Tammy Weinberg in Edmonton, Avram Shirak and Jacob Tenenbaum in Winnipeg, and Joel Chaushu in Montreal for all the audio and video. Let me know how you marked the news of the Bibas family deaths and other hostages, and the joyous news of the homecoming of 25 living Israeli hostages during this latest ceasefire deal. In all, Hamas captured 251 Israelis. More than half have returned alive. 63 are still in Hamas hands, including the bodies of Canadian Judy Weinstein-Hagai and her husband Gadi. Edmonton student Chloe Brandt started a petition this week calling for Canada to demand the immediate release of their remains. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.